Rightio, people's reactions to Act 2 of Season 2 Arcane continue to be mixed. As I said last video, I still very much enjoy it. I talked about positives there, but there are still some flaws I wanted to drill down into in this video. But even then, when it comes to the criticisms, I think people are wrong. The common criticism seems to be that the season is too rushed. That's why it can feel chaotic and plot heavy and less compelling, which, yeah, I don't agree. I think it's true we don't get anywhere near enough of Mel for it to feel like a satisfying arc. She turns up in a prison, talks to someone who isn't her brother, and then does some magic thing to escape. Something I assume would make sense if you knew the game, but if you don't, it feels both like something you don't understand, but also don't care that much to understand. There's not that much arc and conflict. It does mean I was right about why her and Jace were uninjured from the explosion though. Jace, similarly, I don't think we get enough of. We see him twice, both times we already basically know what he's planning to do. He looks conflicted in himself, but we're not let in on that conflict. We don't feel any progressive character beats of doubt or change before settling upon his tragic decision. He just kills Sallow, then pops up at the opportune moment to kill Victor. So yeah, that's all kind of true, and it does point to a rushed act as the cause for problems, but neither of these points are that bad and damaging to the show. Mel is a minor character, and Jace does still get to do something that feels tragic and impactful. As for the fact Echo and Heimerdinger are nowhere to be seen, yeah, that is a little unsatisfying, but no doubt we'll see them next episode, and I think once we have the entire run of the season to look at, it won't matter as much. It's very hard to judge a show on each episode when you can't see the full journey of the season, where everything is leading, so I'm not really that bothered about that point at the moment. Maybe they'll do something really bad in Act 3, but we don't know that. I think Arcane is great. I think it's absolutely wonderful, but if there is a problem with Act 2, I don't think it's the pacing. I think it's, well, the character, I suppose we could call it. Let me try and explain what I mean. I might be wrong on this, but I tend to think when we say a story is badly paced, it's because we know something about the structure doesn't quite feel right, but we can't really pinpoint what. I think pacing tends to be the symptom rather than an actual cause of the problem. And Season 1 has a very fast pace, and that's not a complaint people make about the show. It works, you feel engaged, you don't mind. And Season 2 of Act 2 certainly has slow moments. Jinx gets a long monologue with Silco's chair. We get a very slow walk through the tunnel, all of the time standing around in Victor's commune before things ramp up. So is it as simple as pacing? I made a video yesterday on Jinx and Isha, focusing mostly on episode 4, and I suggested that episode 4 was, in many ways, all over the place. There are lots of disparate things going on, however, the core thread of that episode works very well, the central arc of Jinx developing. Someone who feels alienated by this Jinx movement that accidentally sprung up around her, daunted by the expectations of being a hero, and then when Isha is taken, forced to carry out a rescue mission, but she's performing it with the kind of persona of a hero, a heavy roll of her eyes about that persona, not feeling it at all, until suddenly has this moment of connection with her followers. That's what makes it feel real to her. That's a really strong arc, I think. And the more I think about it, the stronger it feels, and because this is the central thread of the entire episode, it works like an anchor. It gives you something clear to follow as the audience, and it means that all of the disparate elements in the scenes that might have otherwise felt chaotic don't feel too much like that because we're engaged with this arc. Even Vander, I personally do not like what they're doing with Vander. It's not my thing, but it does fit with the arc here. It does still work on a functional level. I don't know, maybe people still argue episode 4 is rushed, but I think they'd be wrong, and I think what stops this episode from feeling rushed isn't the pacing, it's that there is a clear central arc you can easily follow. Pacing tends to feel rushed, not so much when things are happening quickly, but when you as the reader or the audience aren't keeping up with all the things that are happening, when you feel like it's racing beyond you. Episode 5, however, hits a few snags. I think it especially frustrates me because I was especially excited to see Vi at rock bottom. I talked about it in this video. We've seen Vi spending all of Act 1 trying to be someone she's not, trying to suppress her concerns and do something she doesn't want to do but feel like she has to do. And she feels lost and alone, and believing her sister is dead falls upon supporting a Caitlyn who is increasingly distant from her. All the same, she goes along with it, she suppresses some of her beliefs and then reaches a breaking point where she can't do it. She can't kill Jinx, she can't kill Isha, she turns against Caitlyn who then hits her and abandons her in a scene that parallels Vi leaving Powder in Season 1. I loved that. I was super excited to then see Vi essentially alone at rock bottom with no one to follow anymore, nothing to fight for, finally having to figure out what she really wants to do for herself. What is it she's fighting for? Does she even know? How does she find a way forwards? And technically, we do get that in episode 5. We open with a very powerful montage of Vi fighting and getting drunk, trying to drown herself with chaos and to fight the numbness with pain. It's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted, but then it ends. Then Jinx appears in the next scene and provides Vi with an answer to the question of what do I do now? What am I living for? What am I fighting for? She tells Vi that Vander is alive. And the pacing of this episode isn't exactly the problem there. Vi starting at rock bottom and then ending in Vander's arms, I think that works for the episodes. That's a good progression that you can fit into one episode. What doesn't work so well is the beats we get along the way to that. I think it's kind of topsy-turvy in its rhythm. We get a very short moment of Vi at rock bottom, and then are provided an answer to that before a very long, very slow beat of her reaching Vander. I really hope this doesn't just sound like total bollocks, but I feel like that's kind of the wrong way round rhythm-wise, that we should have a longer, slower beat at the start and then a quicker section afterwards as she's starting to find ground and starting to find her way. Look, I love the montage at the start. There's very few, if any, montages in this show I don't like. I think they're a great tool to express changes in time, but sometimes it is also a hindrance because we don't get to really sit with the emotion for a long time. We get a very dynamic experience of the feeling, but not time afterwards to reflect and to process, or even just have characters talk about it. This guy, Loris, seems to be with Vi here, but because we don't get any scenes where they share dialogue, he doesn't entirely feel like a character the way he did when we met him in episode 1. And we do fully empathise with Vi's pain, but it's also hard to empathise with feeling lost and hopeless and stuck when this moment only lasts for one quick cutting scene. It's a great way to set up where Vi is in her life now, but I think it should be that, a setup to it, not the entirety we see of that before moving on to a different Vi. I'll come back to this in a second with a clearer example, but secondly, episode 3 ended with these two at each other's throats. Okay, we get that again in a literal sense here, but they felt tragically opposed before. It felt huge and kind of mythic in its scale, how these two sisters were set against one another. I did fully expect they would find some sense of unity again. I said that in my video about Vi, that she is now in a position of life where she might start to understand who Jinx is rather than just who Powder was, and Jinx finding herself with Isha might start to understand Vi as an older sister. So when they do come together here, it does make sense. If anything could erase the divide between them, it would be Vander. I get that, but it also feels anticlimactic somehow. To go from this to this, you know? Jinx very quickly turns up, mentions Vander, and then we spend a much longer scene where all their differences are reduced to a sibling squabble, which I do kind of like, to be fair. They reflect on Vander's and Zilko's pasts, and then they again find family. The reason it feels fast isn't because of pacing itself, it's because it's hard to buy into this change. So I think just move the beats along a bit. Here's my basic example to demonstrate what I mean. It's not to say this is a better version of the writing, because it's not, it's just a very basic example. Say we have the same montage, and the same shot in that montage of Jinx watching Vi, but then a scene after this between Vi and Loris. A scene where we get to see Vi directly resisting advice and support from a man who somewhat resembles Vander. Vi is pushing people away, she is lost in her isolation. And then we again see Jinx watching from a distance, either in the crowd at another fight, or across the room in a club, or eavesdropping outside her window, doesn't matter. Just an extra beat of that to give us a sense that Jinx has been watching for a while. I think those two beats of seeing Jinx twice sets up the idea more clearly that Jinx is thinking of of her sister, might want to reconnect. We're tuned into that now, so that when she does then appear in Vi's room, it's a kind of beat free in an arc there. It feels more satisfying, it feels less abrupt. And so they talk, but I think you have Vi refuse to listen to Jinx here. Jinx says a bit about Vander, but Vi doesn't believe it. She feels broken and hopeless and everything is wrong. As much as she might want to believe, it's too painful, so when Jinx tries to persuade, Vi loses it and forces Jinx to leave. Which is an extra beat. Vi saying no because she feels too stuck. That's conflict then. Vi resisting change before finally embracing it. It's the same as Jinx at first saying no to Savika last episode. Have that beat, and then a second beat that causes Vi to change her mind. I don't know how, it could be anything. Maybe she stumbles upon this mural of Jinx and it makes her think. Maybe Loris has some meaningful words. Something that just makes her think, and then a third beat after that where something forces her down this path in a more literal sense. Maybe she catches sight of Jinx disappearing down this tunnel, thinks she's being stalked, so follows. Or she gets into too big a fight with the wrong people and is forced to flee down here, happens to bump into Jinx. I don't know, whatever. I'm getting lost trying to provide examples that are bad, that I don't even like. I don't think that example works. The point is just making the rhythm of the episode clearer, making it easier to feel Vi changing in character-driven ways. Beats we empathise with in her character that leads up to both of them meeting in this tunnel. And if adding all of that in does make the runtime too long, I think you could easily cut down some of this section. This is the bit that could run quicker. They squabble, they talk about Vander and Silco, and then they find their dad. Which is a beautifully touching moment, by the way. I don't care whatever criticisms we might levy, it's still very moving. Anyway, similar to what I said earlier, my point is again that it's not the pace itself that's the problem, it's the lack of clearly defined character beats that we follow. One other point, and then I'll shut up. In a broader background kind of sense, Act 2 does something surprising. We begin with mention of riots, we get a ton of Zornites uniting for Zavika's meeting, and then they get shipped off to prison, yes. Jinx frees all of them, all of these people who were readying to fight, who are likely twice as riled up now. What happens to them? I don't know, we don't really see any of this conflict again for the rest of Act 2. Things feel like they're gearing up for a big war, only to then take a sharp turn down memory lane and focus on themes of family instead. We suddenly spend a long time at Victor's peaceful commune until the Noxians head down there, but all the time you are left wondering what's going on in the rest of Zorn. Where's the conflict? Where's the follow-on from this? And that kind of makes it feel like time has briefly stopped to allow us to focus on these other ideas. It feels a bit like some of the stakes have been removed, which isn't necessarily bad, but it is surprising. It's the kind of story beat that I think can catch you off guard on a first watch and can make this feel all over the place. Suddenly, everything is about Vander, and why? Well, because it's about family, because that's kind of what Arcane has always been about. I very much like the way it does tie together by the end of episode 6. Singed is fighting for his daughter, and Bessa is sort of fighting for a family. Caitlyn is fueled by her mother, Jinx and Vi are united by Vander, Isha is fighting for Jinx, and Victor puts a neat little bow on all of this by saying,
"That which inspires us to our greatest good is also the cause of our greatest evil."
Again, it works, and I will talk more about episode 6 in my next video, but this change certainly challenges our expectations. It does feel like a change from what we were gearing up to, and I think that can make the central arc across episodes 5 and 6 even harder to follow, for which, at least as far as my theory is, that can make the act feel rushed, even though that technically isn't what's going on. But I don't know, maybe I've talked an absolute load of waffle in this video. I'm making these at a very rushed speed around my actual job that's taking up most of my time, so I hope I've thought this through enough. I'm really curious to see what people think. Let me know. Again, this continues to be a really strong season. I don't think these criticisms are massive. It's still a wonderful show, but I think it's a little bit unfair when people just brand it as rushed. I think the problem is more complicated than that. So, like the video if you liked it. Subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.